Okay, so first, disclaimers. This is very much a progress report. This is joint work in progress with CMARC, Quintus, and Christoph, who's wandered away somewhere to the back. Yeah. Get slouched down. The other, I told Quintus this, I have like a hard stop at 5:30, which we've been pushed till the end of my talk, but I do need to run out and become a pumpkin right after that. So apologies in advance for being that guy. Okay, so this is an attempt to just write down a basic model and try and understand incentives for decentralization. Okay, so what our basic thought is the following, which is there is some valuable object that is being allocated, and the value of that object is not known to the people who are bidding for it. Okay, so one example could be you're just bidding for the right to own a block, and then you don't know what is the value of the sectors are. It could be you don't know what the prices are. It could be like as me and Pranav, us and Pranav are comparing notes on what we're going to talk about. And one version could be you're bidding on some sort of ETF, and that ETF consists of stocks in Japan and stocks in New York. But unless you're physically in New York and Japan at the same time, you don't know the value of your ETF. Where you choose to put yourself determines how much information you have, how well you can bid, and what kind of what outcomes might be. So I'll tell you where we got. I'll tell you our model. I'll tell you where we got to, and then I'll run the fuck out, and Mark will answer all the hard questions. Okay. Okay. So here's our story. There's going to be time is sort of going to be continuous. Time starts at time 0, and there's going to be some period t. That period t is the period at which the value of this object matters to everyone. Okay? There's a bunch of information sources. You can think of them in the paper, which will, inshallah, exist someday in the future. It'll live on some general metric space. But for now, just think about there are 2 spots. Okay, there's like New York and there's Tokyo. Or there's 2 information sources. Okay, and what's going to happen is now that we got CMARC involved in this, there's going to be information coming as geometric down in motion. Okay, so as time evolves, there's going to be 2 things. So if you're sitting right at New York, you can see what is the evolution of a process in a value in New York. And if you're sitting in Tokyo, you can see what's happening, the evolution of a process in Tokyo. The thing is that what really matters is what's happening at time t. So what the value of the good at time t is what everyone cares about. And that is some function of the instantaneous value of that process at cap t in New York and the instantaneous value of that process at cap t in Tokyo. Okay? That's the value process. Now, what's the gain we want to layer on top of this value process? The gain we want to layer on top of this value process is that there is some sort of auction happening. The bidding of this auction happens at period cap t instantaneously. And you or a bunch of bidders can choose where to put themselves in the space that defines New York and Tokyo. So, for example, if we're really just doing until, Quintus buys better 3-dimensional boards, we're just going to have a 2-dimensional board. You can choose to put yourself, for example, anywhere between New York and Tokyo. And then based on where you are in New York and Tokyo, you're going to suffer some delay to, if this is point X, you're going to suffer some delay to, in terms of what you see about Tokyo, you're going to, what you see in New York, and you're going to suffer some other delay to what you see with respect to Tokyo. Okay? Based on that, what are you going to do? Well, you're seeing, you want to bid at time t, but of course, you only see what the value of the process was at the delays that you chose. Okay? And so you want to make a bid based on this. You're only seeing this information. So you have some residual, you have some expected value for the good, but you also have some residual variance for the good. So if there's a single guy, for example, who's sitting here and they're choosing what they want to do, for instance, the auction might be, you can buy this good for a price of L, some limit price. Do you want to buy it or not? If you're sitting right here, your value is going to depend on both. Whether you should buy it or not is going to depend on your expected value, the expectation of VT conditional on this. And because it's it's a drift-free geometric Brownian motion, does that. And another thing that will enter when you try to compute your expected value, because if you buy, you worry about what is, well, maybe right now, according to what I'm seeing, the expected value of the good is above my limit price, but there's a bunch of variance. So with some probability, it falls below the limit price and I eat a loss. So you also might care about, or you actually do care about, the variance of your value conditional on the information that you're seeing. So what does that mean? So for example, simplest proposition that we can show is if there's one guy and they have to choose whether to buy, where to live, and let's suppose, for example, the value of the object is just the sum of these two signals, and these two processes are sigma 1. So there's a variance associated with process 1, and there's a variance associated with process 2. They're going to choose sort of the barycentric median. So they're going to choose roughly to equalize the two variances. That's what a single person is going to do in this very simple model. Okay, that's great. That tells us that at least if you have one guy and there's, Coinbase and there's Binance, they're not going to co-locate with Coinbase or Binance. They're going to pick the point that minimizes the residual variance, given that what they care about is the sum or some information. Okay. So now what happens with an auction? And that's where bad things start to happen and we get stuck, but we'll tell you where we got stuck. Okay. So one problem with regular Brownian motions is that they go negative, and having prices go negative is no fun in an auction, or having values go negative. So instead, we change to geometric Brownian motions and do products instead. Okay. And because there's an economist involved, economists can do lots of great things, but they get stuck with two people, so there are going to be two proposers. Okay, so there's going to be X Mallesh and X Siamak, and they're going to choose where to live. Okay. What's the structure of the game we're looking at? The structure of the game we're looking at is each of us is going to independently choose where to sit, where to live on this line, or potentially off this line. Then we're going to bid in this auction. We're gonna learn where each of us is sitting. So after we choose, I learn that Siamak chose over here. Siamak will learn that I chose to sit over here, and then we'll bid in this auction. Now, what happens when you do something like this is that the auction actually becomes kind of complex from, it's not a private value auction, it's an interdependent value auction. So what does that mean? That means that because I'm sitting here, we both understand that the value of the object is going to be the product of the value at New York and the value at Tokyo. But because I'm sitting over here, I know more about the New York value. I know what Siamak knows about the New York value. I know because I've seen the whole evolution. I know that Siamak saw a more delayed. This will be sort of. Now this will become delta 1 of xm and delta 1 of xc and delta 2 of xc. So Siamak is going to, so each of us is going to understand some part of the other person's information. Each of us is going to understand that the other person knows more about something other than So I also understand that Siamak knows more about what's happened in Tokyo than I have. So I face adverse selection from Siamak in terms of what the Tokyo value is. And then we both understand that because of the nature of delays, we both live we both also have problems that neither of us knows perfectly what's happening in Tokyo and neither of us knows what's perfectly happening. So what can we show in this model? We can show a few things. So first, we can show that it's sort of not an equilibrium for anyone to, if there are two sort of sources of information, it's not an equilibrium for anyone, for both people to sit in the same place. That's kind of dumb. You're going to make zero money because you'll both know the same things, and then you'll just bid up to the same value. It's worth it to get information from somewhere else. What else can we show? Well, that starts to depend on the auction. So where we stopped is we went down a rabbit hole of trying to solve the second price auction, because the second price auction is easier to solve in analytical closed form. And in analytical closed form, we can calculate what happens, but so we can show that one of the problematic things about the second price auction is, suppose you even go to the limit. Suppose like Binance wins, and Binance has all the information, and the New York information is basically a constant, for example. There's really no variance in the New York information. We can show, or we were very surprised to show, and spent a lot of time going back and forth, that even if I sit in New York and Siamak is sitting all the way in Tokyo, your intuition would be Siamak has all the information. Mallesh is sitting, we call it New York, but could as well be Timbuktu with no relevant information. And indeed, even then, I will earn positive rents in a second price auction, which is kind of dumb and suggested to us that something bad is happening in the second price auction. We figured out what that something bad is, but it's related to a pathology of the second price auction, which is that Siamak sometimes bids less than its expected value for the good in an interdependent values auction. So leaves positive rents on the table sometimes. So that is problematic. So we then switched to the first price auction, and now the problem with the first price auction is that there is no easy to describe analytical closed form of what our what our equilibrium strategies are. We believe that the equilibrium in the first price auction, or let me not say that. We believe that we can solve it with numerical simulations. We've somewhat convinced ourselves that it doesn't have the pathologies that we described in the second price auction. And that's where we are. So what we're hoping to do, as I said, this was a progress report, not a paper. So what we're hoping to do next is understand, is it indeed the case that, for example, the equilibrium is, in this second price auction, is Siamak goes and sits all the way in Tokyo and I go sit all the way in New York? Is that the equilibrium, that you get sort of geographic decentralization to at least the places that are producing the relevant information? So you won't collocate. And then if we can get there, then we can do other fun stuff. But that's kind of where we are. I'll stop here, take questions, and then run. Yeah.
Are you modeling latency to the auctioneer, or that's like?
So good. So that is, so right now, the way we're doing it is, regardless of where you are in this network, you bid exactly at cap T. So, there's no like additional latency to the auctioneer.
That'd be super interesting.
That is, so we know how to do that. Oh, we need to solve this first before we can do that next. But the next step is then to say something like, also, depending on where you pick, you don't get to bid at cap T. Your deadline is endogenous to like 2/3 of the other proposals, which would be the natural sort of proposal time, right? You can push it right up till you can get enough attestations for your bid, and that's sort of next on the road.
Yeah, this is kind of a model if you assume the testers are uniform in the space, so it doesn't matter where you are, but it's easy to change.
Yeah,
that part.
Yeah.
Does the model allow for one participant to have multiple replicas across the?
Well, you'd have to define what that means in terms of, you could have multiple replicas, but then what does that mean in terms of my bid? If I bid based on, like, I can't break the speed of light and like get my information from New York to Tokyo. If I submit 2 bids.
Assuming that New York and Tokyo move in similar random pattern, like, depending on like your bidding is going to be different where you are, because like it could be.
Yeah, exactly. You'll bid differently based on where you are, based on the information you see. So maybe like if you think of it as like the value of an ETF that consists stocks in New York and stocks in Tokyo, maybe the New York stocks went up and the Tokyo stocks went down.
Yeah.
So, but when your Tokyo stocks go down, you understand that when Siamak understands that when he's being outbid by me, he's being outbid probably because the New York stocks went up. And you want to take that into account when you're bidding. So that's sort of the underlying technical work that we're solving for. All right. Siamak will give you the more understandable, or Quintus or Christoph will give you the more understandable versions of this.
If I can understand it, so can you.
Just a very quick question. I mean, this is just not my field, so I may just not be understanding something fundamental, but like, why would it not converge to just New York and Tokyo? Because that would mean that you're at least getting the best possible timing for one source of information always.
Yeah, that was our intuition. But in the second price, so imagine a world where Siamak is at Tokyo and Tokyo has all the information. In the second price auction, the structure of the second price auction, the structure of the equilibrium of the second price auction, or the structure of the second price auctions have multiple equilibria. Okay. For example, there's an equilibrium where I bid $1 million regardless, and you say, well, okay, yeah. So that those kind. Now it's not that kind of shitty equilibrium that's driving our problem, but the equilibrium that is the natural equilibrium that has been studied for this says that you bid sort of a number, and that number can only depend on what you know, obviously, right? So you have to draw some imputation of what the other person knows. The cutoff value, the imputation of what you put of what the other person knows means that sometimes you're bidding less than your expected value for the good. That's bad news. Like if you're sometimes bidding less than your expected value for the good, it means Siamak is sitting in Tokyo. He has all the information, but he's bidding less than his expected value for the good. I have no information. I can bid the expected value for the good and make some money. But that's dumb, right? But because then there's also somebody in Timbuktu who could do it. There's somebody sitting in like, Delhi who could do it. Yeah.
And to be clear, when you say it's dumb, you mean that the model probably doesn't reflect reality.
It doesn't. It doesn't reflect our considered intuitions as fine economists. The whole game in economics is like you see where the arrow landed, and then you draw the concentric circles around it and say, I hit. So that's okay.
Thank you.
All right.